Welcome back to F1 Brake Check, where we analyze F1 with more precision than a McLaren pit stop. Whether you're a diehard fan or just here for the absurd, we've got something for you. The summer break is over and the action returned to the iconic Zandfort circuit. Today's edition will have a brief history of the Dutch Grand Prix. Corey will melt my brain with our Stump-the-Pundit section, and we'll talk the latest news and rumors, and boy, do we have a lot to cover. So buckle up and settle in as we go full throttle into turn one on this week's episode of F1 Brake Check.
Welcome. You are listening to F1 Brake Check, the epic podcast for all things Formula One, where we discuss technology, history, news, and perspective. With your hosts, Scott Vick and Corey Broom.
We're back with F1 Brake Check. I am Scott Vick. With me, as always, is my pundit for life, my brother in arms, my ride or die, Corey Broom. Corey, how are you doing this week, sir?
Good. Yeah, really good. So over the weekend, I was able to go to New Orleans before my flight out. So we hit Cafe Du Monde, which is, I think it's a requirement. I think it's by law. You have to go by Cafe Du Monde. So we went by there, just kind of tooled around for about an hour or so, and then hiked it back home. So what about you?
Sweet. About the same. Doing real well. Things are going well. Work is there, and we had a really fun weekend with this weekend's Grand Prix. So lots to get into.
Yeah.
All right, so let's jump into our history section. The Circuit Zandvoort, built on the coastal dunes of the North Sea, home to the Dutch Grand Prix. The track has a storied history that dates back to 1948, when it was first held as a non-championship event, becoming part of the Formula One World Championship in 1952. The legendary Alberto Ascari won the maiden Grand Prix in his Ferrari. The Zandvoort circuit quickly gained a reputation for its fast, sweeping, highly banked corners and its often crazy weather due to its proximity to the beach. Throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, the Dutch Grand Prix saw legendary drivers triumph. The winners are a who's who of F1 greats. Names like Jackie Stewart, Dieter Pironi, Jim Clark, who holds the record for 4 victories at the event, and James Hunt, who took his maiden F1 win at Zandvoort. However, due to financial difficulties and safety concerns, the Dutch Grand Prix was dropped from the F1 calendar after the 1985 running. The event lay dormant for 35 years until it was revived in 2021 as part of Formula One's push to include more European venues and the popularity of Dutch driver Max Verstappen. The new Dutch Grand Prix on the revamped Zandvoort circuit is a fan favorite, a driver favorite, and a modern classic. Nice. So I was so excited when Formula One added the Dutch Grand Prix back to the calendar.
So how much longer was it originally?
The original version, I want to say, was probably about 4.5 or so miles long.
Healthy,
so it was just a little over half the land was carved off and sold off as part of the receivership, as they call it over in Europe. So your thoughts on the track and the Dutch Grand Prix?
Oh, the Dutch Grand Prix is always fun. It's great because the fans make the track obviously is just phenomenal. Like I said before, one of the gauges that I always use is if people know and remember and can talk about the names of the corners, then you have a decent track. Same thing at the Dutch Grand Prix. People know all the corners. Maybe not all of them, but they definitely know some of the famous ones. So that's always a telltale sign for me. But for me also is the fans. You have the fans that actually love. Obviously, they love Max. I mean,
yeah,
he's Max, and he's from there.
Of course, they're always going to cheer for the hometown boy.
Yeah, exactly. But also, they are F1 fans. So even though Max was behind, and we'll talk about this more, but even though he was behind and clearly not going to win, you still had the Dutch fans on their feet cheering the person who won. And that to me just showed class and how much they truly are F1 fans, not just a Max Verstappen fan. I love that aspect.
Absolutely. Yeah, their passion, the passion of the Dutch fans is just unlike just about any other. I mean, they rank right up there with the passion of like the British fans and the Italians, and so it's such a great venue and such a great race.
Look forward to it all year.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so our tech corner is still on summer break this week, but we'll return next week with an all new fascinating topic. So we've got a lot to cover today because we haven't been with you for the last 2 weeks, and boy, has there been a lot of news over the last 2 weeks. So we're going to kind of jump into that for right now, and then do our Stump the Pundit before we do a recap of this weekend's action of the Dutch Grand Prix. At the start of the summer break, we got the news that Checo received a vote of confidence from Red Bull, and that they guaranteed that he would be there until the end of the year, at least until he flubs up too bad and they need to put somebody else in there.
Right.
So we'll see if he actually does make it through the rest of the year. But I thought it was very telling, the fact that the team gave him, that vote of confidence now, but at the same time, it kind of makes you wonder that how long that's going to stay in place.
But they have to, because if they don't give him the vote of confidence, then their lead in the constructors is just going to be diminished even more, because he's going to be even more in his head and he's going to do even worse. So in my mind, it's back Checo or immediately fire him and get somebody else to replace him. So I think that Red Bull, at least for right now, is playing their cards exactly the way that they need to. Try and get him confidence, try to get him over whatever slump he's in, and then hopefully make him actually start scoring points again. Otherwise, let him go now and don't hold back.
Don't look back.
Exactly. Don't look back. That's it.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you on that, because even if they were to, promote either Yuki or Danny Rick up to Checo's seat, it would still take them, because the cars are, for all intents and purposes, are so vastly different in almost every respect, with the exception of maybe the power unit itself. But, I'm sure that suspension, electronics, setup, things like that, they're going to be so vastly different cars that, even the best driver is going to struggle probably for at least a couple Grand Prix. And like you said, the title fight has become so tight right now. So more Red Bull news, though, is that we got the news that Christian Horner was basically vindicated in the fact that the female employee who accused him of inappropriate behavior, her appeal was basically rejected. Horner has basically, like I said, has been vindicated in the fact that she apparently, there wasn't enough merit in her accusations to continue forth with any kind of legal ramification to Horner at all. Horner can get back to focusing on his place in the team and his job.
Exactly. Yeah. So he doesn't, just like you said, he doesn't have any other distractions, because, to be honest, if we had this over our heads, that would be hard to push out and concentrate on anything else. So I'm sure a large portion of his concentration is geared on what's happening now, what's happening with his private life. So hopefully with this behind him completely, he can focus more on the team and getting that to be back where they were last year.
During the summer break, we also got news that Andrea Stella, team principal at McLaren, received a contract extension by virtue of the amazing job that he has been doing in turning around the once great McLaren team into the front runner that they've become again. Mm-hmm. So I think this is great news, and it's going to take and definitely help with the stability at McLaren, and so that they can continue to progress and become, a true force to be reckoned with in the sport again.
It's just amazing to me how fast that they made this turn, because last year you and I were joking about Danny Rick having the same amount of points as the entire team, which was 0.
Yes, and he wasn't even on the grid.
That's right. He wasn't even on the grid at that
point. He wasn't even racing at that point. He was still the reserve driver at Racing Bulls, then called AlphaTauri, and he had just as many points as McLaren had through the first, I think, first 4 or 5 races.
Yeah, great memory on that one. Yeah, that's exactly it.
The progression of McLaren, starting with the promotion of Zach Brown from being co-CEO to being the lone CEO, Last week, we got news that Red Bull's sporting director, Jonathan Wheatley, is going to be leaving Red Bull at the end of the season to become the new team principal at Audi starting next year. And I think that this is definitely a good move for Wheatley. He has spent a number of years at Red Bull. He's done a fantastic job there. And for him to get this kind of promotion, and I think it's also going to be very, very good for Audi. I think they got the guy that they really wanted. Audi is making a lot of moves that they are gunning to be, maybe not fighting for the championship right out of the gate, but when they, become the quote unquote full constructor in 2026, they're definitely going to be gunning to be the top of the midfield I think is where they're going, really trying to aim for.
You can see every single one of their hires is just, it's almost like Ferrari to me. It's amazing what they've done.
Yes, that is an excellent point. That yes, they are doing a lot of the same things that like Ferrari did, where they are going after the absolute strongest people that they can find and getting them on board. Also at Spa, we got our first look at the teaser trailer for the new Brad Pitt movie based around F1, which will simply be called F1. First of all, I'm going to go out on record as saying that is the laziest naming of a movie I have ever seen. With all of the marketing people and the amount of talent in Hollywood, the fact that they couldn't come up with a better freaking name is just beyond me. But the other thing too, though, is that a lot of the scenes though that were shot from the perspective of the racing itself, that they have gone to a tremendous amount of effort to try to make the racing part of it look as authentic as possible. Let's move on to our next item. So also over the summer break, we took and got comments from the Williams team principal, James Vowell, talking about his surprise signing of Carlos Sainz, who we've talked about, that he kind of was the linchpin upon which the rest of it seemed like a lot of the rest of the silly season was hinging upon, because just about everyone who had an open seat was trying to get Sainz to join their team for next season. And the fact that the Williams team was able to get his name on a contract, and Vowles was basically has said, hey, we have made all the right moves to make sure that we are successful going forward. And Carlos has seen that, and that was the reason why he decided to join him and, to join Alex Albon at Williams. And I thought it was very telling about how excited Vowles was about getting signed to a long-term deal at Williams.
It's always been a curiosity because he had so many people going after him, why he chose Williams of all places.
Yeah, absolutely. But again, like I said, is that the last 2 or 3 years, Williams have made a very concerted effort to upgrade their facilities and upgrade their personnel. They've got technical director Matt Harmon from Alpine is moving over to Williams. They've made a number of other really high profile hires, just like Audi has done. And they have done a phenomenal job of putting the building blocks in place to make the car significantly better going forward. We got the news today that Logan Sargent is out at Williams, starting with the Italian Grand Prix this coming weekend, and that Argentinian Franco Colapinto, and I know I butchered pronouncing your name, so I apologize for that, who is being run in F2 as part of the Williams Driver Academy, will be taking over Sargent's place starting with this weekend's Grand Prix. Now, we first saw Colapinto at Silverstone during FP1 last year, Now, it wasn't, a remarkable run, but it did give him some very important seat time. And I think that, and of course, now with this announcement, I guarantee you they're going to take, and he's going to be probably in the sim, probably night and day until
I would be.
he lands in Monza this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, Williams just saw that it was the right move to make now. So your thoughts on it?
Wait, I was reading, I think Valls was saying, or somebody was saying on the Williams team, it was because of his massive wreck, Sargent's massive wreck over the weekend, which I understand. That cost them probably $1 million easy on repairs
Easily.
and such like that. So I can understand, hey, it's not working out. We're going to cut you anyway. So, let's go ahead and promote somebody else. The only thing that I really wish they would have given Mick a chance, because that was something Toto was talking about, that he was going to push Valls either way, but he said that he would really like it if they would give Mick Schumacher another chance, because he's a strong driver. He really thinks that there should be a seat for him in F1. So I was really hoping that the announcement would be Schumacher would take that place, but obviously that didn't happen. Other than that, hey, your team, you see what's fit. I thought that, the midseason, letting go of people midseason, I don't think is really the greatest for morale or anything else, but you're not making any points anyway. So what's the difference? As long as he
Exactly.
doesn't cut, or as long as he doesn't crash, I think putting him as a trial basis, I think it's fine. What about you?
For all intents and purposes, whoever's in that seat, they're just keeping it warm until Sainz joins the team at
Exactly.
the end of the
Yep.
season. So it doesn't matter whether it's Sargent or whether it's Colapinto or if it's, Mick Schumacher. But the thing is, though, is that one of the rumors that I had heard, I think it's very telling, the fact that Toto was really wanting Schumacher to get that spot at Williams. All right, so our last news item is concerning the never-ending driver carousel, but we did have one more seat filled. Was announced earlier last week that Alpine has, in probably one of the worst kept secrets in Formula One, that Alpine has signed their junior driver, Jack Doohan, as their second driver to team with Pierre Gasly next year at the Alpine. For the first time in quite a while, we're going to actually have two rookie drivers on the grid for the 2025 season.
Be nice. It'll be good to see.
Yeah, absolutely. 2025 is starting to look like it's going to be a pretty exciting season.
Exactly.
All right, well, that's our news section for this week. So we're going to jump into my favorite section of the whole show. We're going to play Stump the Pundit. This is the section where Corey tests my long-term fandom of Formula One by quizzing me on various bits of trivia from the sport. So, Corey, what do you have for me this week?
In the spirit of mid-season firings and Logan Sargent being released, I thought, hey, why don't we test Scott's brain on how many other mid-season firings we've had? So we're going back a few years, not all current. So let's start off with this one. In 2017, which British driver replaced Pierre Gasly at Toro Rosso?
Oh, I can see his face just as plain as day, but I cannot think of his name. I can't think of. Oh my gosh. Boy, I'm off to a bad start. Go ahead, lay it on me.
Danny Kvyat. He was replaced by Gasly because he was underperforming, but he did return later that year. Very briefly, but he did return.
Yes, I do remember that now.
In 2009, there was a crash gate scandal. Which driver was dropped by Renault?
That would be Nelson Piquet Jr.
That's it. Yeah.
Piquet and his father, former world champion, were so disgruntled by him being fired after doing everything that the team asked him to do, that they were the ones who actually revealed to the press and started the whole Crashgate scandal.
Who was the Brazilian driver replaced mid-season by Red Bull in 2006? He wasn't able to perform much like the other few drivers at Red Bull mid-season. But who was it?
Oh, wow. Boy, I'm really sticking up the joint today. I cannot think of his name right now.
Christian Klein was the person that was replaced in
I mean, it's like
2000.
I could see him. I knew it
Yeah.
started with a K, but I could not think of his name. If you'd held a gun to my head, I wouldn't have been able to come up with that.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Last question. In 1995, which Italian driver was dropped by Ferrari mid-season and replaced by Nicola Larlarni?
Uh,
Larini.
95. That was John Lacey, wasn't it?
Nope. Gerhard
Oh,
Berger.
oh, yeah, but okay.
He left Ferrari
Yes.
mid-season.
Yeah.
He did it just like, yeah, he did return later, but he was dropped briefly.
Yes, because yes, that's right. Because the 95 Ferrari was so dreadful that Gerhard Berger left mid-season, and basically he said he was going to retire, and then I remember him coming back towards the end of the season.
And that's it. That's my last question for
All right.
Stump the Pundit.
Yes, and you did a very good job of stumping me this week. I mean, I just stunk up the joint this week, but that was fun. I enjoyed it. All right, so let's take and do a recap of this week's action from Zandfort and the Dutch Grand Prix. So the first thing that we need to talk about, how McLaren has come back from the summer break and they have not lost a step in any way, shape, or form. And they basically laid waste to the field this weekend. We had a absolutely commanding qualifying performance from Piastri and our pole setter, Lando Norris. And despite his, what has become a very worrisome, I want to say, trend of Lando not getting great starts from pole position, despite him losing out to Max at the start, within the first 10 laps, he's able to pass Verstappen and then just took off into the distance. And it was just a commanding performance from Lando. And although Oscar wasn't able to, reel in Leclerc to take the podium step, Leclerc, from a very surprisingly strong Ferrari this weekend, Piastri still looked absolutely phenomenal all weekend long. So it was like they were fast from the minute they came off the transport. And what say you?
It looks a bit like it did last year with Red Bull. He was over 20 seconds ahead of Max.
Mm-hmm.
He was out there making tea and, sipping on some tea for a little while and, taking breaks, whatever he wanted to do. He had, like you said, it was a commanding lead, and it was everything that Max had in him, at least initially, to try and keep up. Now, towards the end, Max was more looking after his tires, so he let the gap go, but the gap was there. And Red Bull didn't have an answer as far as the tires. The tire drag was horrendous on those Red Bulls. Mm-hmm. Not so much on the McLarens. The McLarens were like, "Oh, we don't need to come in. We're fine." Mm-hmm. Both Lando and Piastri both said that their tires were fine, whereas with Red Bulls, both Checo and Max both were saying, "Hey, our tires are slipping all over the place."
Mm-hmm. A couple times that there was actually twice on the broadcast and everything where they were asking Lando, it said, how are the tires feeling? And, hey, they're great, mate. They're doing really good. And so they played the pit strategy perfectly. The team did their job perfectly, and McLaren, just like I said at the beginning, they just basically laid waste to the entire field this weekend.
It was F2 cars against F1 with McLaren in front.
Yeah. Absolutely. Speaking of, our second place finisher, Max Verstappen in his Red Bull, he qualified second. He looked fast all weekend, but just didn't seem to quite have the measure of the McLarens. And like you said, the tire degradation on the cars was, not great. And the fact that, over the course of the race, basically Max Verstappen and Checo both basically maintained their positions in the fact that they finished where they started the races at. So Max qualified second, Checo, much to his credit, after being given that vote of confidence by the team, he makes it into Q3, had a really strong qualifying and ends up qualifying in fifth and ends up bringing the car home in fifth place for some much needed points. The Red Bull team looked good, but they didn't look dominant like the way that the McLaren did.
If you took the McLarens out, Red Bull looked great, but you had that measure of just this phenomenal. Well, we have a phenomenal driver in Norris, but the car and then the strategy on top of the car, they were in sync from go.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk about Mercedes. Kind of seemed to be a little bit back into the doldrums this weekend in the fact that, first of all, Lewis's qualifying position was definitely not what we were expecting. He had some problems with the car during qualifying and didn't make it out of Q2. But then George, had a really good qualifying, coming in, fourth place. But then, he slid back during the race. He qualified, a really strong fourth, but ended up finishing seventh. Now, Lewis, on the other hand, who didn't have a great qualifying, had a really good race, made a couple of, really inspired overtakes to come in eighth right behind his teammate. And he was only, I think, 5 seconds off of his teammate at the end. But, they were really never a threat all weekend long, which was kind of surprising, seeing as where they were at, the 3 races leading up to the summer break. Really kind of expected them to be, I didn't expect them to be dominant, but I expected them to have a little bit of a stronger showing than what they had this weekend. So what do you think?
Yeah, it was a bit disappointing. Like you said, it seems like that they took a fairly large step backwards, but I'm sure that they'll be back. Whatever the issues were that they found, I'm sure that they'll come back in Italy.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of Italy, we have to talk about the home team in Ferrari, who they came off of the trucks with a handful of upgrades, but they didn't expect the cars to go nearly as well as they did. And it was very surprising, because their qualifying pace was not great. Charles Leclerc only qualified sixth, and Carlos Sainz just barely made it into Q3, qualified 10th, but, their race pace was absolutely stunning. And the fact that Charles was only 3 seconds off of Max Verstappen at the end to take the third podium position all race long, Charles looked really strong. And Carlos also looked really strong in the fact that he worked. And I misspoke that Sergio Checo didn't finish fifth. He actually lost a place and finished sixth because Carlos Sainz had a really strong race, made up 5 points through both a combination of brilliant overtakes and outstanding pit work by the Ferrari team, which, we can't joke about Ferrari looking like a bunch of clowns when they're doing a pit stop. They have become probably, I would say, right behind McLaren as being one of the best teams as far as the pit stops go and as far as the pit strategy goes. So despite the fact that Ferrari didn't expect to look good this weekend and at times looked like they were going to be kind of middle of the top teams, maybe, behind McLaren, Red Bull, and Mercedes, they looked phenomenal all weekend long and got, a pretty good points haul this weekend.
Yeah.
Again, we continue to sing the praises of Frederick Vasseur and the fact that he is even on a weekend where Ferrari is not expected to go well, he is able to rally the troops and make it, and make the right moves, to challenge when needed. Now that we've talked about, Ferrari and Mercedes and McLaren and Red Bull, we have to talk about how vulnerable is Red Bull right now, because by the end of this weekend, with the strong showing of the McLarens, they now only have a 61-point lead over McLaren, who has taken a huge chunk of the distance between the two teams in the point standing as for the Constructors' Championship. And I saw a graphic this weekend that said that if they continue on the pace that they are, with the average points per race being won by McLaren and being won by Red Bull, that there's a very good possibility that McLaren could pass Red Bull in the Constructors' Championship by the time we get to Singapore.
No doubt about it. Because, if you think about it, Checo has not been showing well. So he did this last at the Dutch Grand Prix. But if history repeats itself, he's not going to do very well. And, looking at Max, in the last few races, he hasn't been in the top spot. He hasn't been in the top spot in 5 races?
Yeah.
He's been in 5th a couple times,
race.
2nd, 4th. So you're looking at your top scorer not being the top scorer anymore. You're looking at your second person, and he's not doing very well. And then you have McLaren, who is taking those spots over from Red Bull. So mathematically, it's not going to be that difficult. Now, this is where Checo has to earn his spot. If he doesn't, there's no 2025 for him. At least in my opinion, I don't see him being able to be signed again, even though he has a contract and everything like that. I don't see him hitting those performance markers. If they lose out because Checo isn't able to get 5th and above, why have Checo then? He's not able to score the points that they need him to. And if they lose the constructors to McLaren, that's going to be huge on them. To answer your question, most definitely Red Bull constructors and drivers both are very vulnerable at this point.
Yeah, because I saw another very telling graphic that now, I mean, it's a long shot, but The Athletic had a really good breakdown that if Lando were to win, I think it was if he were to win all but one of the remaining Grand Prix, and he took fastest lap in at least 5 of those races, and Max came in second in every single one of those races that Lando won, then Lando would win the championship by 1 point. So I do think that, it's a little far-fetched, but as we've seen in the sport of Formula One, nothing is a given. And, all you have to have is one race where Lando wins and Max has another DNF.
Oh, yeah.
Then I mean, it's game on. Yep. I mean, I think we are going to have a real knockdown, drag out fight to the end this season. Yeah. And I am super excited. I am so stoked. We haven't had a really good, tight title fight in a couple of years. And I'm super excited to see how the rest of this season is going to shake out.
Right, exactly.
So Racing Bulls, we were talking about, how Mercedes seemed to kind of in the doldrums this last weekend, seemed to be even more so in the doldrums this last weekend. Yuki had, a decent qualifying, he just barely missed out on making it into Q3, qualifies 11th on the grid. But then the race pace of the cars just did not look good this weekend, and Yuki ends up coming in 17th, 1 lap, off the rest of the field. Danny Rick, had an even worse, qualifying. The fact that he only qualified 13th, and again, out-qualified by his teammate in Tsunoda. But his race pace was also not great. Now, admittedly, he didn't lose, ground like Yuki did. So he ended up, he qualified, 13th, ended up finishing 12th, but still not a great weekend for the Racing Bulls. So your thoughts on, Tsunoda's, qualifying and losing out in the race, and Danny Rick's performance this weekend?
At times, Racing Bulls look like they're an actual midfield competitor, and then you have races like this, and it's just like, what's happening? Is it strategy? Because you have 2 people there. I'll give Danny some latitude, I guess. He's a fair driver sometimes. Sometimes he's a good driver. Sometimes he's not a great driver. So I'll rate him fair. And then you have Tsunoda, who's just been killing it lately. And both of them to slide back like this, I don't know. It's almost looking like the same thing that Mercedes was having as far as problems. Maybe they get it set up right. Something wasn't working correctly with them this weekend, as well as Mercedes.
Okay, first of all, let's start off with Williams. We've already talked about Logan's horrible. We already talked about Logan's crash at turn 4 during the race. He didn't even participate in qualifying. So, he only got to race, he raced, at the steward's discretion. So he was allowed to start the race. And originally, officially, at that point, he was actually supposed to start from the back of the field. And then we get the news that Alex Albon's car had been disqualified after qualifying because the floor was found to be illegal, which negated, not a great, he did make it into Q2, but even making it into Q2, his best time only saw him relegated to 14th on the grid. So not a great qualifying effort from him. And then he gets disqualified. So that takes and tucks him in behind Logan, for the start. Now, admittedly, he takes and he makes some, a few moves and winds up finishing 14th on the day. Mm-hmm. So, still out of the points, but considerable number of, spots made up during the race and everything. But yeah, Williams just did not have a good weekend. They didn't look good, all through practice and everything. So your thoughts?
Yeah, same. They didn't look good. I mean, obviously you have Sargent there that he was looking good, and then he had some backsliding a little bit. And I think that's probably from the news that he was going to be released. So, that probably shook him up a little bit. I just think that Albon taking qualifying out, he was able to make up some really good places. He made some really good passes, really strong on strategy. So for him, I think on the Williams side, at least, I think he did a really good job this weekend.
Considering what he had to work with this weekend,
exactly.
Yes.
That's exactly what I mean.
Let's talk about Haas real quick. Not a great weekend for Haas, in the fact that it was kind of a tale of two weekends, in the fact that we had Nico Hulkenberg qualified 13th, made it into Q2. He looked really strong. Kevin Magnussen looked really strong during qualifying, and then poor Kevin, who just seems to be so snake bit this year, ends up having to start from the pit lane because under park for May conditions, he had to replace some parts on the power unit, which with the grid penalties relegated him to the pit lane. And again, that's one of those situations where terrible starting position, he winds up only finishing 18th and, didn't have a great race. But Nico Hulkenberg, on the other hand, did, and just barely missed out on making the points and finishing in 11th.
Because he held on to that place for the longest time, and then he got passed by Alonso, just passing ease just about. So,
and speaking of the Aston Martin of Fernando Alonso, that was another team that kind of at times looked really good this weekend, and at other times didn't look so great. During qualifying, Fernando qualifies 7th. Alex Albon with his disqualification ends up promoting Lance to just right behind Fernando. Both drivers looked pretty strong, in qualifying and in practice. I think Lance had something wrong with the car and caused him to slip back to 13th and out of the points. And like you said, Fernando, was only able to pip Hulkenberg to gain that 1 point only in the very late stages of the races after, Nico tried to hang on as long as he could for that, hold on to that position and get that 1 point, so, not a, great drive from either driver, during the race, but they didn't look as bad as I thought they were going to look coming off the trailers. Let's talk Alpine now. So we had, kind of a tale of two different weekends, in the fact that Pierre Gasly had, a really strong qualifying, and with the Albon disqualification, gets promoted up to 9th place on the starting grid. But he had a really good, strong practices, really strong qualification, got into Q3, and during the race, he raced hard and ended up finishing in the same place that he started and finishing in ninth. But it was a marked difference between him and Ocon, who is the outgoing driver going into next season. Ocon, he started 15th and ended up finishing 15th. And basically he was just pretty much invisible the whole weekend. So Alpine, who looked as strong as they did, at least they're not looking as bad as they did at the beginning of the season, where we thought that they were going to come dead last. They still don't look anything nearly as strong as they did at the closing stages of last season, but they still are definitely showing signs of life. Since the beginning of the season. But I did expect them to come off the truck with a little more pace than what they did, after the summer break with the raft of upgrades that they brought to Zandfort.
Gasly looked fairly good this weekend. Ocon, very, very much less so.
And last but not least, we're back to, Sauber, who we talked about earlier in the show about how they have looked absolutely horrible. We're pretty much certain that they're going to come in dead last in the constructors. And, they had, a so-so qualifying, still didn't even make it out of Q1 and ended up finishing dead last. And they were the only two drivers who finished 2 laps down from the leaders. I think it's about time to wrap it up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it is.
All right, then. So that is all the time we have, and it's time to put the covers back on the cars and observe track curfew. We'll be back next week with a brief history of the Italian Grand Prix, more technology goodness in our tech corner. We'll break down the action from the weekend and lots more. So until next time, he's Corey. I'm Scott. We are the pundits of F1 Brake Check. Let's go!
Thank you for listening to F1 Brake Check. If you have enjoyed what you heard, don't miss a single episode by hitting that subscribe button in your favorite podcatcher, or you can watch the video version on YouTube. Help us grow by sharing us with your friends and fellow F1 fans. You can contact us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok and X at F1 Brake Check. Our website is f1brakecheck.com, where you will find links to all our content. We value your passion and your feedback, so please take a moment to review our podcast. Your reviews help us grow and improve, and it means the world to us. Share your thoughts, rate us, and let us know how we can make the show experience even better. F1 Brake Check is a production of Brake Check Media. For your hosts Scott Vick and Corey Broom, until next time, keep yourself inside track limits, and try not to pitch it in the kitty litter.